here to talk about the Berlin Wall. Stay tuned. So I was in Germany in 2016 in Berlin and spent about 5 days there. It was a fascinating place to visit, and while I was there, the Berlin Wall is very omnipresent, though it's no longer there. There's only 0.1% of 1/10 of 1% that still exists, and it's really not the full intact wall. It's only parts of the western facing wall. So on the complexities of the two Berlins, west versus east, east versus west, you can look at the flags here and know that they're almost identical. And in fact, the two national flags of East and West Germany were the exact same flag for about 13 years. So you see 3 conferences create the two Berlins and 2 Germanys. You have the London Protocol, Yalta Conference, as well as a Potsdam Conference. And you begin with the London Protocol, which is the first of the conferences, establishes that Germany will be divided into 3 occupational zones. That's the Soviet, US, and the British. And the Yalta Conference. So the Yalta Conference says there must be an unconditional surrender of Germany. Stalin agreed to have France as the 4th occupier. Germany would undergo denazification and demilitarization, and war reparations must be repaid by Germany. So East Germany is required to pay the Soviet Union, though it is administered by the Soviet Union. So it's a very strange setup. Potsdam Conference, the last of the conferences, means that there's a prosecution of Nazi war criminals, reversion of German annexation, meaning that Austria goes back to being its own independent country, and Poland and so forth. German standards of living not to be exceeded by the European average, which I think is very interesting. And war reparations, again, must be repaid, so it's repeated again. 4 occupational zones of Germany and Austria were included. Now, in a historical context, Nazi Germany ends with the capture of the Reichstag in April of 1945, unconditional surrender of 7 May 1945. Berlin was a unified city after World War II, though there were 4 distinct zones. There was 1 mayor, unified transport system, and utilities. Now the breakdown really begins and almost starts immediately and deteriorates right after World War II's end, and it really culminates with the Berlin blockade of June 1948. So the Soviets are saying there's a violation of the tenets of the Potsdam Conference, and the blockade begins on the very same day the West German Mark is announced. Now there was really never an agreement for rail or highway access from West Berlin to West Germany. There was an agreement, however, for access by air to West Berlin at all times. Because it was never codified, rail and highway access was a privilege given by the Soviet sector or the East German government to the 3 Allied zones, that is, becoming from West Berlin to West Germany. So there's approximately 3 different highways going to West Germany, as well as a couple of rail lines as well. Now, there are unintended consequences that happen. Now, when you look at the 3 conferences, Potsdam, Yalta, and the London Conference, you can really look at this in terms of saying, well, wait a minute, there's a short-term, the consequences are you take care of the short-term, but you do nothing in the long-term. It's getting together Stalin and the British, the French, and the Americans to really come upon a governance model for Germany and to making sure that there's never a repeat of the Nazi regime. But the long term is that nothing is really decided, so the city becomes divided, and really that's a recipe for disaster. A long-term viability was, something that was short-sighted on all parts, not just one side or the other. And this becomes the epicenter of the Cold War. Now, the Berlin Wall itself, known as the Berliner Mauer in German, it's built because East Germany loses 3.5 million people, or 20% of its population, to West Germany. Now, if this happens in any other country, they probably would have done the same. Walter Ulbricht, who is the first chairman of the DDR State Council and chairman of the SED, so it basically, with his title, it doesn't sound like he's a distinct head of state, but that's what he was. He said, quote, "Niemand hat die Absicht, eine Mauer zu errichten," meaning that nobody intends on building a wall. First time that's ever been mentioned was in June of 1961. Erich Honecker, who becomes the second DDR State Council chair and party chairman, is the prime builder of the wall. 13 August 1961, West Berlin is encircled by the East Germans and the Soviets, and the wall construction begins. Now here I like this photo here because it depicts the 4 generations. There were walls in, say, the 1961 And really it becomes much more sophisticated, and it's through, say, learnings, incremental learnings, that the East German government learned how to secure its border. 62 to 65, you'll notice here actually where this crane is and the man standing on the wall, that is actually the second generation. The wall out here is really the first generation. So they said they're going to build away from the border so that they can control all parts of the wall, both sides of the wall. And in 1965, 1975, you get the third generation. Now I believe this is actually an outside patrol, because I look at these lights here and I could be wrong, but this looks like it might be the control strip lights, and they had full right actually to patrol the outside. They rarely did so, so this could be an inside shot and that could be the outside. Between 1975 and 1989 was commencing what they call the Grenzmauer 25, or the Grenzmauer 75 building program. Now this is very cool because you see this man here walking his dog. He's actually probably technically on East German soil, and actually the East German government could have painted, and they did sometimes, the wall itself, in terms of they controlled every bit of the wall. They could look on the outside, patrol it, they could do anything they wanted. They generally didn't do so. And what I love about this picture is that every part of the wall was different. Every control strip was different. So I'll show you a diagram of generally how the wall was, but there's really not a defined record of what the wall really was like. Now, see, this is the diagram I'm speaking of. Now, this is the stylized version. What I do like about it is it actually shows here that this perimeter is the East German side of the wall itself. And you see all the paintings on the wall, but you also see on the inside the control strip area. And this is also known as, certain parts get certain names, but in general I would call this entire area the control strip, because this is an area that no East German non-military person was ever allowed to be. You're going to see these ditches here, anti-vehicle ditches. These hedgehogs were anti-vehicle hedgehogs, meant to deter both from east and west. You have a patrol route that was actually on the absolute perimeter. You have the guard towers here, two different stylizations. Actually, there were three different programs for that. You have bunkers, you have dog runs, and you have all sorts of electrification systems. And here is the East German perimeter. Oftentimes, you have state police or state patrol here on the Volkspolizei on the eastern portion of the wall, but you might never have been allowed to be in this section. You needed a permit to be here. And so it's taken a lot of resources to run this. You see 14,000 Grenzentruppen who were guarding the wall. Very, very expensive. I think you do see some of the lighting here, the lighting poles, and the entire section between East and West Berlin had this lighting as bright as day going on all night long. And you have this checkpoint system, which is very interesting. It's very set up in this very cat and mouse kind of way. Foreigners could go through 2 to 3, depends on how you define it. So Friedrichstraße was one where foreigners could go through. That is actually where the metro, the U-Bahn, still actually operates on both sides. You do have this particular point where you could get out as a foreigner and get to East Germany. The other one would be the checkpoint Charlie, which is right here. And the third point, like 2.5, right here, Waltersdorfer Chauze. So you can go to the Schönenfeld Airport right here. And that's only if you had a flight and ticket out. It's the only way you could get there. Now, the fencing and checkpoints are really interesting because West Germans were allowed only to one particular entry point. You have one where West Germans and West Berliners could go, and one where only West Berliners can go. You do have some transit points for them that go to West Germany, and one of these is just rail only. The wall metrics itself, so you have about 43.1 kilometers between East and West Berlin. So you have 112 kilometers between West Berlin and East Germany, 155 in the entire West Berlin surrounding wall area. Watchtowers of 302, again 14,000 guards at all times. Dog runs about 259 and about 15 checkpoints, as I just mentioned. The wall itself is 45,000 units, so this is the last program. They weigh about 2,750 kilograms, 3.6 meters in height, and 2.1 in width. So when you look at the wall, I've seen many pieces of the wall. It doesn't seem to be formidable. It doesn't seem to be this amazing, maybe like the Great Wall of China. It's very, very different. It's the system, the entire network, that makes the wall so impenetrable. And here's the complexity of the wall system. Again, you see similar diagrams you saw before. And this one is actually not correct. It shows west, which is not true. That's actually still technically, it's facing towards west, but about 3 to 5 meters, if not more, say some examples might be 10 meters, was still East Germany. So when you look at this monolith, it's not the monolith that I think a lot of people imagine. It's basically that every section of this, of the wall itself, and there's very few photos that exist, believe it or not, that show a preponderance of what the wall really looked like. And there's a great Deutsche Welle program that shows the construction of the wall. It's an animation, and how it's really hard to do because there's no really great examples that exist today. So there's a viewpoint in Bernauer Straße. This viewing area is really a simile. It's actually where the wall was, eastern and western portion of the wall, but it really doesn't show you the examples of the hedgehogs or anti-vehicle ditches or anything else. So you can look at it in terms of a historical perspective. There's much fewer cameras back in, say, '89, and also on the eastern side of the wall, you weren't allowed to photograph the wall at all. And besides that, you might not have had the resources to have a camera or film. So the legacy is there is a large, again, as I mentioned, the photos that don't exist. There's no really specific map that shows exactly and can document each section of the wall. They might exist in terms of what maybe a military occupation did of maybe the United States or maybe the West German government. Maybe those are still classified. If you look at Google Earth, you'll see nothing. But it's very, very interesting to see. So there's about 221 meters or 725 feet of the original western wall only that exists. So the legacy of the wall was really to come to in terms of what the wall was, but there was really no intense documentation process. And actually this could have happened from the civilian side. So when the wall fell, the West German government took out all the electrification and so forth. But they might have documented what the wall looked like. The United States might have done that. I speculate that is still classified today. The aftermath. So what's very interesting is that there's a lot of disparities between East and West Germany today. Now, you're 25% more likely to be impoverished if you are from the East versus the West. Significantly higher unemployment, and rare for a West German company to have opened operations in the former East Germany. Now, here's some interesting points. Trash is significantly less in the East versus West because it had fewer resources. Also, a legacy of living in the former DDR, or the German Democratic Republic, was a recycle and reuse of things. There's a much higher childcare rate in East versus West. So back to the cradle to grave mentality of a communist government and communist regime. Significantly higher vaccination rate in the East versus West. According to Spiegel magazine, 57% of East Germans said life was good during the DDR. And there's a sense of nostalgia. So nostalgia is really a longing for the past, so missing East German products and also the cradle to grave care. Now here's some great photos that you see up here. This rare photo in the upper left is showing how people are migrating after highway protests in West Germany and migrating to the East. It's the only picture of its kind that I'm aware of. You can look here, and this is probably 1989. You have the East German Guard troops on the eastern portion of the wall, and this is the only flat surface of the wall that exists. Here, I just wanted to show, this layer here of the wall itself in terms of the inner layer and the construction of it. Now, this is John F. Kennedy visiting the wall itself, looking towards the Brandenburg Wall, and again, on the lower left side is this particular viewpoint looking into the east. Here you see the Truppen, East German troops coming from the east to the west in 1989. And you can look at Berlin today from space, and here's what east and west looks like. You're going to see on the lighter side is the former West Berlin, and on this yellowish side here is the former East Berlin. So Berlin is actually a city that's, people don't realize that it's actually the poorest, largest city in Germany, and it's also too poor to have a unified light system. So the unintended consequences of not planning, the unintended consequences of not making specific choices in what happened 50, 60, 70 years ago really results and lives with us today. It's a fascinating place to visit. And if you like history or not, it's still an amazing place to visit for art, history, culture, restaurants. There's just so much to see and do. It's a great place to visit. Thank you for watching today. Questions and comments, list them down below. I'd love to know what you think. Give a like to this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel. Thanks a lot.